Good morning, crime community. I'm here to continue to read out Poe. We're at the appeal of Poe's literary personality and his learning. The superior attunism in controversy was not the only feature of Poe's literary personality that was out of tune with the new age. Most of other features also came too late. The enthusiasm of Byron's moroseness and his despair had largely passed out of fashion. It was later possible for Griswold, in the memoir with which he prefaced his collection of Poe's work, to capture the American imagination with the heavily moralized, satanic version of Poe's Byronism that he presented there. But Poe himself projected his own Byronic attitudes and too intellectually immoral a way to achieve this kind of appeal. As far as his fictional projection of his own idiosyncratic personality was concerned, Godey's fiction had already fallen well into the modern way of finding a sentimental hero or heroine as vacuous and anonymous as possible, with whom the reader could readily justify. Finally, Poe could certainly not, in his role of the learned expert, count on great favor in the magazine milieu, which facts were diluted to the average taste and opinionated elitism was suspected. Why did Poe retain his learned tendency in the later work? He could hardly have hoped to dazzle the mass audience with his erudition. Shrewd writers and editors had already advised him to jettison learning if he wanted to succeed with readers who had repudiated it. The best explanation seems to be that he could not expurgate this element from his writing, therefore continued in certain moods to hope for an elite that would respond to it. He had inherited a rhetorical pose which he enjoyed without the audience that went with it, and rather than give it up, he continued to believe that this kind of audience he wanted might be available. The distance of his final learned role from the master audience taste might be measured by comparing Eureka with Nature's Divine Revelations by the popular Andrew Jackson Davis, the work of the Poughkeepsie seer, whom Poe mocked in the first printing of Melitona Tata, usually cosmology material in the combination of popular sermon and space fiction, very different from Poe's rational and elusive, if idiosyncratic vein of argument. Indeed, far from arguing, Davis claimed to be verbally inspired by unseen spirits. The fact that cosmological ideas were in the air in such a form may explain why, according to Poe, the names were reviewed Eureka, all praised it as far as I have seen yet, and all absurdly misrepresented it. One must admit, of course, that there are all differences in the myths of the rational representation, for all the sense of the European tradition that modifies and complicates Poe's erudition. There is a common quality of the two American works. There is a magnificent megalomania related perhaps to the abhorrence of intellectual authority which had come. Leon Howard says by the beginning of the 19th century to characterize the minds of the American common man. I point out earlier, and similarly between Eureka and De Quincey's article System of the Heavens, but although Poe's erudite affections and his superior elitist feelings are so like those of such British learned journalism, his writings carry his individualic vibrations, more individualistic than those one meeting either in the British magazines or in the writings of more sober, better educated, and economically secure habitual writers in the American reviews. And we are reminded that Poe played the expert in cranky fields like cryptography and autography, where his interests were more in tune with those of the mass audience. He does not, however, affect the main issue. The audience appeal of Eureka is far more like that of System of the Heavens than like that of Nature's Divine Revelations. This may be a naivety at the core of Poe's journalism, which reverberates beneath all his inquired European attitudes. But Poe's learned conventions alienated him in the many of his most characteristic expressions from the mass audience and could respond readily enough to the Poughkeepsie seer. The popularity of Poe's hoaxes. Poe's hoaxes are usually taken to exemplify his attunement to the American mass audience, although the practice of Godet and Graham does not suggest that the hoax really had much appeal for his anxiously respectable middle-class reader as against their sentimental and self-consolidating staple. Certainly, several of Poe's exercises of this mode seem to have been popular, both in England and in America. The fact or fiction issue in itself could still become a source of publicity, as the success of Melville's Teepee in 1847 on the strength of the widespread discussion about whether it was true demonstrates, and it was on this simplest of levels that Poe achieved his popular successes of the balloon hoax of 1844 and Mr. Valdemar in 1845, and these, his plays of the gullibility of the mass audience and his self-conscious implication of manner, are noteworthy. The balloon hoax, according to Poe himself, made an intense sensation, the square around the office of the New York Sun being besieged by those who wanted copies. The autography series in Graham's lighter tone and less sardonic than the earlier series in The Messenger was very popular. Again, according to Poe, the fact of the case of M. Valdemar, while it was noticed in America, seemed to have been much more impact in Europe. Mesmeric enthusiasts in Scotland, as well as in Boston, wrote to Poe, and Elizabeth Barrett told him of the sensation the piece had caused in London. But his claim in 1847 that the writer who aims at impressing the people is always wrong when he fails in forcing that people to receive the impression suggests that his superiority was merely given another form in his hoaxes. And this is confirmed when one looks at the 18th and early 19th century precedents of such writing and sees how all of Poe's hoaxes conform to the semi-elitist pattern. The 18th century gentleman of gentlemanly elitism is forcefully present in Poe's first hoax, Hans Piffel, and in his last, von Kempelen and his Discovery, both of which have little appeal to the mass audience and are hostile to it. And other hoaxes correspond to the journalistic pattern of the quality popularity, akin to the found in Blackwoods. They seem to be the only example of a convention found in the British Journal that Poe used was complete success on the American audience. The 18th century history of such writing might be said to have had two stages, represented by the writing of Defoe and Swift. And the first, the hoodwinking of the reader, is a simple, unselfish, conscious, and necessary technique. In the second, it is a sly contrivance, primarily designed to delight the few at the expense of the uninitiated many who are to be imagined duped. In the latter form, it is generally conjoined with satiric assaults of pedantry. The early Blackwoods, aiming to please both few and many, followed the latter tradition of its mystification and burlesque, while its simpler fiction was sold to the many in Defoe's ways, but was rather more self-conscious in its editorial presentation. Thus, the magazine combined the two central 18th century approaches to fact fiction hoaxes with a particular quality popularity audience in mind. Around the more popular fictional series in Blackwoods, like Galt, Ayrshire Legatees, and Warren's Diary of the Late Physician, developed a kind of humorous irony where the editors insisted that their fiction was, of course, fact, while printing correspondence which disputed this. Thus, they protected their sales to the naive disapprovers of fiction, provided entertainment and a palliative for the more intelligent reader, and ensured a talking point and the source of publicity. Similarly, the postscript of the novel The Omen by the Blackwoods writer James Galt tries to maintain the illusion that the novel was an account of some letters addressed to the late Sir George Shelbrooke, RCB, but an oblique joke for those in the know is inserted. Mr. Blackwood, we are told, had agreed to publish the letters as they stood in his magazine. But submitting to them to Mr. North, his confidential advisor in literary matters, the eminent scholar made some objection to certain personal structures in them by rendering many of the letters unfit for their miscellany. The linking of the imaginary letters to the imaginary editor adds to the elitist touch of entertainment for the inner group at the expense of the outer without betraying the many to positive scorn. The linking of the Poe's earliest hoax, Hans Fall, stands very clearly in the pseudo-scientific parody tradition of Martin Scriblerus. His later adaptations of the form combine the two traditions of Blackwood's does and shows his growing interest in the mass audience. Although there was never loose or hope that superior readers will enjoy the joke and admire the skill of the hoaxer, the act of deception in Arthur Gordon's Pym and the facts of the case of Mr. Valdemar is subordinate in the natural interest of the material, as it is in Mole, Flanders, or Robinson Crusoe. But a part of Poe's purpose is clearly that the intelligent reader should see the joke. He points out significantly in the letter to Duchevchik that the design of Robinson Crusoe was far more to please or excite than to deceive by verisimilitude, whereas in the story of Mrs. Veal, we are pointed now and then to perceive a tone of banter. A tone of banter is not allowed in the text of Mr. Valdemar or of Pym, but it is apparent from time to time in their editorial appendages that it was in those of the Blackwoods fiction. An editorial note in the Broadway Journal regarding the truth or falsity of the statements made in the facts of the case of Mr. Valdemar asserts, "It does not become us, of course, to offer one word on the point at issue. We may observe, however, that there is a certain class of people who pride themselves upon doubt as a profession. While the publicity of this talking point is here the principal aim, there is an ambiguous appeal to the intelligent reader and share the joke with which feels again in the preface to Arthur Gordon Pym. Pym writes that since the incidents of the tale were so marvelous, it seemed to him that the public at large would regard what I should be forth as merely an impungent and indigenous fiction, but that Mr. Poe had advised him to prepare at once a full account of what I had seen and undergone, and trust in the shrewdness and common sense of the public, insisting with great plausibility that, however roughly as regards mere authorship my book should be got up, its very uncouthness, and there were any, it would give it all the better chance of being received as truth. If the joke were appreciated, it would be clearly going to draw attention to the skill of which Poe counterfeits the crude, forthright style of the son of the Nantucket sea stories trader. Mr. Poe's praises of the shrewdness and common sense of the public is meant to refer the sophisticated reader to the real Poe's successes in gulling the uneducated mass audience. The appeal to Poe's hoaxes are to readers who would enjoy a demonstration of his view that the noise of the mob of its imagination by this at any time can be quietly led. No one is to judge by Robert Carter's report that the brother of O.W. Holmes could be persuaded that Pym was fictitious, or by Poe's need to assure his educated friend Evelynth that Mr. Valdemar was a hoax, of course, that seemed to be lacking in America, where the cynical readers could appreciate a joke at the expense of their simpler brethren. Of the letter of Duchenick, designed to interest him in his final hoax, von Kempelen and his discovery, Poe stressed the deliberateness as opposed to the accidental and instinctive convincingly of Mr. Valdemar. It was said a kind of exercise or experiment of the plausible or verisimilar style, which he believes to be the first deliberate literary attempt of the kind on record. The hoax is constructed out of haphazard allusions of imaginary newspaper reports of Kemplin's sensational success in making gold to the source of his method in Sir Humphrey Davy's diary, and the whole thing is too cleverly oblique to have created the mass stir and the temporary check to the gold fever that Poe said he hoped for. Its appeal far more assiduously than in the previous hoaxes, it really to those who appreciate the way the whole strength is laid out in verisimilitude. The Poe put it in a letter to Duchevnik that these subtle-minded readers are given the clue to the author's doubts about the reported earlier discovery of alchemic process. There is nothing either impossible or very improbable in the statement made. My opinion of the paragraph is founded principally upon its manner. It does not look true, even though our narrating facts are seldom so particular as Mr. Kissam seems to be about the day and date and precise location. This implied compliment to Poe's indirect and convincing presentation of the improbable, together with the mention of Locke's moon hoax, which Poe initiated in Hans Fall, and of Mazel's chess player, in which Poe had written an article. It meant to draw the sophisticated reader attention once more to the technical skill of Edgar A. Poe. Dupuchnik, screw judge of the taste of the time, apparently refused the tale for the literary world, and it appeared in a little-known Flag of the Union. That leads us to Poe's elitism and the stylists, divided aims, the lost elites, conclusion, Poe and the British magazine tradition. What else is I going to do today? I'm not going to show Tinu trinkets today. I'm going to show one record. Last record I bought. For all the vinyl community members who have taken away Steve's wrenches, yeah, have a nice day. Here's a record for you to look at. This is Metallica. Master of Puppets. I got this at Target. Obey Your Remaster, the #1 greatest heavy metal album of all time. Rolling Stone's Reader's Poll, featuring Master of Puppets, Mastery, Come Home Sanitarium. In it, it has a die-cut sticker of Metallica at the Hellfire Club. There's the back of the thing. I haven't opened it yet, but I will be listening to that later today. So if you think there's any truth and hope and like of what I'm saying here, please like it and share. And will Steve ever break 100 followers? Have a nice day.